Grace and peace to you from God the Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I want to say Happy Mother's Day, and we've got one more little short video that we want to show for you, just to keep things light, keep things going, and to celebrate Mother's Day. All right, so happy Mother's Day. And you saw some things up there that we sang about earlier. You know, moms, that's some kind of acronym for loving people when they don't deserve it. That's the same thing that God does for us. So be sure you reach out and, like I said, give a shout out to your mom today. Tell her happy Mother's Day. So today, I'm excited for a couple other reasons too, and I know I'm a geek and I understand these things, but today's the fifth Sunday of Easter. We're working our way to Ascension Sunday and working our way towards Pentecost Sunday, and I know I get excited over crazy stuff, but we're excited about the series that we're in right now. We're calling this series 1/3 because we're spending these 40 days of Easter on the third of what we call the gospel writers. The gospel writers spend a third of their time writing from Palm Sunday to Ascension Sunday. So this is the 1/3 that we're talking about here, because sometimes we gloss over this a little bit. Like I've said before, we hit some of the highlights, but we don't get the main events, we don't get the main people, we don't spend enough time on them. We just don't get enough time to do it unless we pull back the reins and we say, okay, we're going to spend some time going over some of the things that happened during Holy Week and some of the time after that as well. So we're still in the middle of Holy Week here. We're studying people and events from that time, and again, some lesser known, some better known. Some of these stories happen or occur in all four of the Gospels, but like today's lesson, it happens only in the Gospel of Luke. So today, as we heard in our reading, we're going to do like we do every Sunday. Our goal here is to learn God's Word better and to better apply it to our lives. Learn how to apply these truths to our lives, these events, the examples that God gives us in His Word. How does that work in our life here in 2020? How does that work in our life here during a pandemic? How does it work in our life on a day-to-day basis? So that's our goal today, and that's what we're going to be going for, because like I said, we're going in the book of Luke, and as you saw from the gospel reading, we're going to talk about a very well-known and a very well-documented historical figure that played a role in the Easter story, played a role on that, that was Good Friday when all that happened. But again, let's take a look at that and see how we can apply these things to our lives. So we pick up the story when the leading priests present their case, their charges against Jesus to Pilate. And this isn't the first time he's heard it, but here he is again. So in this is chapter 23, verse 4. Because again, this moment that we're going to get to only occurs in the book of Luke. So we're going to concentrate a little bit more on Luke today. Sometimes we spread it out over the other Gospels, but we're going to stick everything we have right now into the book of Luke. So once again, Pilate says this man is not guilty of anything in verse 4. But at the same time, Pilate senses that the leading priests are up to something, right? They're up to something. So he's looking for a way out, any way out. Then he hears something that he feels he can use, sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card, because in verse 5 it says the leading priests, became insistent. They said, but he, that's Jesus, is causing riots by his teaching wherever he goes, all over Judea from Galilee to Jerusalem. And Pilate picks up on that in a heartbeat. And he says, wait a second. I forgot that this guy is from Galilee. So the priests immediately recognized their mistake. They slipped up. They said too much. You know, they're getting out of hand, they're out of control. But he jumps on that. And in verse 6, this is one of my favorite verses of the Bible. It's a nice short verse. He says, oh, Yeah, he's from Galilee. That's right, Pilate says. Oh, well, okay, wait a second now. In verse 7, basically says, well, Herod Antipas just happens to be in Jerusalem at this moment for the Passover. We'll get to that a little bit more in a minute here. But he's here in Jerusalem, so why don't we just send him over to Herod and let him talk about it for a while. Let him solve this case. I'm going to get back to the political side of that and the legal side of that in a second. But I just want to pause here a moment for station identification, because there's a lot of Herods that are bouncing around in the Bible. That name gets tossed around, and we have it all over the place. Who's who, where's where? I mean, it gets more confusing than this guy. I want to play a little bit of who dis. It gets more confusing than this guy. So who dis? I bet half the church gets this one. This is a guy by the name of George Foreman, right? You guys are shouting it. I can hear it already. Good. George Foreman, he's a boxer, right? Well, the funny thing about George is he named all of his sons. I think there's 5 of them. He named them all George. So I don't know if we have George Jr., 3, 4, how it actually works. He said he did that so he could simplify things, to really simplify things. And I was like, really? Tell me boxing doesn't cause brain damage. But actually, he said, here's what he said. He said, let Muhammad Ali punch you in the face all night and then see how many names you can come up with and how many names you can remember. But, okay, I'm sorry. I digress a little bit. We get to this name Herod. Herod was in historical documents. We have them way before this guy named Herod the Great. But that's kind of where we start in the Bible, is with Herod the Great. He ruled from about 37 BC to 4 BC, and his kingdom kind of looked like this. Maybe we got a map of that, of what Herod's kingdom looked like. And again, I say about because there's some argument, not decades of argument, but a couple years argument. Was it 37? Was it 36? Was it 4 BC when he died? Was it 2 BC? But about 37 BC to 4 BC. So this is the one we call Herod the Great. He's the one that kind of paid his way into being a Roman citizen, and he changed things. But his dad and his grandfather had set him up for success way before this ever happened. But Herod the Great is the guy in the Christmas story. He's a super powerful client king, we call him. He's answerable to Rome. He has to respond to Rome, but he's kind of on his own jurisdiction. He's the guy that tried to trick the wise men, right? He's the guy that had all the babies killed in Bethlehem. Not to mention some of his own sons, some of his wives, because he was so paranoid about life and so paranoid about people trying to get to him. He had a member of his own family killed. So not a cuddly guy at all. We wouldn't really, and actually, none of the Herods that we're going to talk about here, none of them would you invite to be your best friend or to be in your inner circle. These guys were not great people, but this is Herod the Great. Now, Herod the Great died again in about 4 BC. And then his kingdom was divided among 3 of his sons. I should say 3 of his surviving sons, because some of them didn't make it to adulthood. First of all, there was Herod Archelaus. Now, Herod Archelaus was the oldest, so he got the most. He got about half of Herod's kingdom. And you can see that on a map, maybe. If you look at that middle part, I don't have a pointer with me, but you see that middle part where it includes Jerusalem, it includes Judea, Samaria, that whole area right there. This is the guy that was in control or in power when Mary and Joseph took Jesus to Egypt to get away from Herod the Great. And then Herod Archelaus became the ruler in Jerusalem then. And Joseph said, we're not going back there because of that guy. That guy is actually worse than Herod the Great. He's actually meaner. He's actually a more evil person than Herod the Great. So that's why they went up to Nazareth, into that area, into Galilee, in that area up there. So now, again, he's not a very cuddly guy either. Now, he didn't last very long, actually, because I think I've told you this before. When Rome would conquer an area, they tried their best to leave the government in place. So as long as they did what Rome said, they left that government in place. Herod Archelaus was so evil and so wicked that Rome took him out of there. They said, we got to get rid of this guy. Now, they didn't replace him with one of Herod's sons, a different son. They replaced him with what we would call a Roman procurator. That's why Pilate is in charge in Jerusalem and not one of Herod's sons at this time. And when you think about it, it all has to fit together. It all has to make sense, because we think about, our day-to-day lives. We think that God must not know what's going on or must not care what's going on. But he does. And he set this up long before, because when you think about it, Pilate has to be in control, or a procurator has to be in charge in Jerusalem at the time. Otherwise, Jesus doesn't get crucified. If it's Herod, then he doesn't get crucified. He gets stoned, he gets killed a different way. But Scripture said he's going to be crucified. So God was setting this up long before he needed to have a guy like Pilate in that church. So that's Herod Archelaus. Didn't last very long, had the biggest kingdom. Again, that went over to one of the Roman procurators then from that time on. Then there's Herod Philip. And by the way, Herod is a last name, and they just go by their last name and then their first name. Herod Archelaus, Herod Philip. Now, there's a lot to talk about Herod Philip, but when you start talking about it, it sounds more like a soap opera than history. So I'm going to kind of just gloss over this guy, but just know that he had the northern area. You can see it there, east of Galilee, mostly the Syrians, the Greeks, that area right up there. But that leads us to the guy that we're talking about today. His name is Herod Antipas. Jesus in, I think it's Luke 13 maybe, calls Antipas the fox because he's a very cunning guy, he's a very wily guy, he's also a very evil guy, but he's more of a politician. He flip-flopped into different parties and just said different things, whoever was in power, whatever he needed to say to make himself look good and blame other people for what was happening. That was Herod Antipas. He received about a fourth of his father's territory in that northern area, Galilee, Perea, that kind of area. And again, so he's the guy that had John the Baptist killed, so he's one that comes up a lot. And like I said now, Pontius Pilate sends Jesus to this Herod, this guy, Herod Antipas. Since Jesus' trial, he said, well, Herod's in town, Jesus is from Galilee, but the high priests, all their charges were in Jerusalem and around that area, so Herod Antipas really didn't have any authority here. It was not his jurisdiction, but so that's why he's here. Now, again, a little more confusing than George Foreman's sons, right? At least they were all called George and we knew who they were. But anyway, like I said, Jesus calls this guy the fox because he's a lying, cheating, we would say no good scoundrel. And so, but he tried to align himself with the Jewish people, with the Jewish population, even celebrating and participating in Jewish celebrations. Like now, that's why he's in Jerusalem at this point in history, because the Passover is about to start. So anyway, the whole matter, Pilate sends it up to Herod. And some historians will tell you that Pilate did that to get the case off his hands, but that can't be the case because Pilate knows, and Herod knows, and Jesus knows, and the high priest know that Herod has no jurisdiction here. He has no legal right to judge Jesus. But as a kind of a courtesy, maybe Pilate sends him up to Herod. But I think what Pilate really is doing here is buying some time. Because the high priests bring this guy to Jesus, or actually says the leading priests bring Jesus to Pilate. And Pilate finds no guilt in him, and he wants to get rid of this case. And Pilate knows, he knows what's going on because today is Good Friday. Tomorrow is the Sabbath, right? You can't have a crucifixion on the Sabbath, but it's not only the Sabbath, but it's the beginning of Passover. So it's going to be a good 8 days before if we can get past today, Pilate's thinking, it's going to be 8 days until we can actually talk about crucifying this guy again. By that time, Pilate's probably thinking things will cool down. Maybe some of his followers will rise up and they'll get him out of this, and he'll actually speak some things in his own defense, and we can get him out of this. So Pilate, I think, is just kind of kicking it down the road, and this is a great way to do it because he can get it down to Herod, and he can respect and honor Herod at the same time. So, all right, so now here they are. Pilate says he's Herod's case. Bring him up to Herod. And the leading priests are like, oh, because they know the time crunch that they're under. Herod's palace is on the other side of town. There's a lot of people here for the Passover already. Even with a box of Roman soldiers going through the street, it's going to take a long time to get to Herod's palace. We only know, who knows how long we're going to be there with Herod. And so now we got to get all the way back here again. It's going to waste a lot of time. So that's what they're thinking. That's what's going through their head. So Caiaphas probably sends a runner up to Herod's palace to let him know that they're coming. Let him know what's happening. Let him get set. So this can maybe take as little time as possible. And immediately, Herod is excited about this. He's been eager to meet Jesus for quite some time now. If we go back, stay in the book of Luke now. If we go back to Luke 9, 7 through 9, this is where it says, when Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, right? So all this fits together, heard about everything Jesus was doing, he was puzzled. When we say everything Jesus was doing, that's the miracles that Jesus was doing. That's the healings that Jesus was doing. You know, we only hear about part of it in the Bible. We've really got to dig in to get into the details because there's simple lines, simple verses that say almost, oh, by the way, entire cities, entire villages, entire towns brought all their sick people to Jesus and he healed them all. And it says it just like that. They brought everybody to him, and Jesus healed them all. We've got a smattering of healings that Jesus did, but man, if you were standing there watching this happen, it would be literally beyond belief what was happening right there before your eyes. That's the things that Herod is hearing about. He fed how many people with a loaf of bread and some fish? Wait a second now, the things he's being puzzled, and that word puzzled literally means flipped his mind upside down, made him think a whole different way that he really couldn't imagine what was really happening here. And then he says, all right, now it's really confusing because some people are saying that this is John the Baptist. Remember, this is the guy I had killed. That can't be John the Baptist. I saw his head on a platter. There's no way that this is John the Baptist. Is it? Right? He's a little confused about the whole thing. Verse 8 said, others thought Jesus was Elijah because Elijah did some of the same things that Jesus did, some of the same miracles that Jesus did, Elijah did in the Old Testament. So, maybe it's Elijah that came back, one of the prophets risen from the dead. Now, Herod is really flipping over. But he said, I beheaded John. I know what happened here. So who is this man about whom I hear such stories in verse 9? And he kept trying to see him. That's repetitively trying to create moments and situations where he could get to Jesus. Because you got to think for a second, again, get in this Bible and walk around. Herod isn't in the marketplace. He isn't in the temple where Jesus is. He's not in the synagogue where Jesus is. He's in his palace. So the only way he's going to get to see Jesus is if Jesus walks into his palace. Well, guess what happens? Jesus walks into his palace. Now, again, this is where the story really begins. All that other stuff I just talked about was introduction. Here's where the story really begins. Now, ever the diplomat, Herod is probably rather pleasant when Jesus walks in the room, when Jesus walks in the door. So this is, we'll pick it up in verse 8 here, 23, verse 8. Like I said, Herod's a diplomat. He knows how to talk to people. He knows how to get. That's why he's where he is and why he's survived so long with the things that he was doing. He probably offers chairs to everybody. Can I get you something to drink? You're my guests here. Let's, be cordial about this whole thing. The prisoner probably still had to stand in the middle. But hey, I just want to be your buddy. I just want to talk to you. So he's probably saying some things that, are trying to warm Jesus up a little bit. Verse 8 says, now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus. Again, so he had wanted to see him for a very long time. That's what we saw back in chapter 9. So I wanted to see him for a very long time because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. There's a lot going on in verse 8. I'm going to spend just a minute here. So it says, when he saw Jesus, that's a key word. When he saw Jesus, it literally means to examine. Herod got up from his chair, probably. We don't have a whole lot of information about this, but we can see how Luke is writing about it. Probably got up and gave him, the once around, up and down, trying to figure out who this guy is. Because right now, you got to, again, picture it. If we're standing here in Herod's temple at this moment, Jesus doesn't look like a whole lot. He hasn't slept for a day and a half. He hasn't eaten much. He's weak. He's been beaten up already, and he's a mess, right? He's all dirty, and there he stands. But this is the one I've been hearing so much about, Herod is thinking, and I don't want to miss it. Because he's actually probably got some of his friends together and said, hey, you guys got to come and see this. We've been waiting to see this guy. We've been hearing so much about him. Well, he's coming, so he's going to be there. So let's get together and talk about him. So that's it. So that's when he saw him. And it says he was very glad. And when it says very glad, that kind of holds back a little bit. That is ecstatic would probably be a better word for this, how Herod was really feeling about this. He was doing cartwheels when he was doing this. And then it says this. It says he wanted to see some sign performed by him. We've talked about this before. Usually Luke would use the word miracle here, some show of power. But that's not what Herod said. Herod said he's looking for some validation here. You say you're the Messiah. I want to see some validation here. I've heard about all this other stuff, but I want to see it happen right here before my eyes. And he's talking to Jesus, and he's like I said, trying to probably butter him up a little bit. I know he played that Galilean card. Hey, we're just dudes from Galilee together down here in Jerusalem, this crazy city with all these people around here, but we're just country people. We're just country folk, you and me, right? We're the same, Jesus and Herod. And Jesus is like, oh, come on. Are you being real right now? So again, Herod is looking at him like some kid would going to the circus, hoping to see some fire eater or a sword swallower or some other kind of sideshow freak, right? That's what he's wanting from Jesus. Maybe you can just, make some water come out of the wall like I heard happen, or out of this rock like Moses did when I heard in the Old Testament, or maybe you could just make some thunder happen, or you could create a storm instead of calming one, or something like that. That's what he's asking Jesus. And Jesus is standing there cold, right? Again, remember how savvy he is. So we see in verse 9 that he starts this conversation. conversation with Jesus. He starts this thing going on. Questioned him at some length is what we have here. He questioned him at some length means he kept talking. Herod didn't stop for a minute, right? He just kept going on with words, probably talked a little bit about himself, probably talked about his own accomplishments, how he probably deserves to have Jesus do something for him. And again, we're just from Galilee. We're just buds coming up here from Galilee. Probably forgot what he was talking about halfway through and had to come back around again to the subject again. So he's asking Jesus all these questions, doing all this talking. When he finally pauses, it says Jesus answered him nothing. Jesus didn't say a word, right? Herod didn't stop there. He kicked up some more words. He tried again. I'm sure, again, played that Galilean card. Maybe he even tried to butter him up on how popular Jesus was and how everybody heard so much about him. And, clearly this is a misunderstanding, Jesus, and I have the power to clear this whole thing up. All you have to do is do a miracle for me, do a sign for me, and I'll clear this whole thing up because, Jesus, I'm your friend and you need me right now, and he's dying to see this happen. So if Jesus would simply perform a miracle just to authenticate who he said he was, we could all benefit from it. Herod is saying, after all, don't I have the power? And like I said, Luke uses the word sign. Herod is simply saying, prove it to me. Now, again, I went a little bit far on what Herod was probably saying, but that's kind of how that conversation went. Used many words, kept pressing, kept going on. When he finally gave up, stood there looking at Jesus, Jesus has his gaze fixed on a point on the wall. And that's when the high priest, or the leading priests, kick in again. Right? They start shouting accusations against him. He's a fraud. He's a fake. He's nothing. If he were something, he would have done a miracle for you or shown you a sign. This guy is clearly a fraud, a charlatan. We need to get him back to Pilate so that we can, process him properly. And Herod probably lets them shout like that. And it says the way the Greek reads, they're shouting at the top of their lungs. Herod probably lets them shout for a while and then finally gets them down into silence. Because he's finally got an idea now. In verse 11, it says, Herod and his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, treated him with contempt and mocked him. That literally means that they reduced him down to nothing. Shouted things like, you are no king. You are king of nothing. Look at you. Look at what a mess you are. Look at how filthy you are. Look at your feet. You look like you haven't slept for a couple days. Look like you haven't eaten for a while. What are you a king of? You're a monarch of no one. You're a king of nothing. Again, once Herod realized he's not going to get what he's looking for in Jesus, he goes on the attack, and he brings his guys with him. And that's probably those soldiers that are around him are probably his personal bodyguards, and they're having a blast with this thing, right? And again, the second half of verse 11 says they dressed him in a gorgeous robe, sent him back to Pilate, only after they mocked him repeatedly for quite some time. And this wasn't just any old robe. I mean, the Greek, like I've told you before, the Greek language is very vivid in how it describes it for us. This is a robe that would have been used by a politician who was running for office. So that's kind of the signal that Herod sent back to Pilate, saying this guy is just campaigning for some kind of thing. He's a nothing, he's a nobody, and we're going to dress him like that. They're very brightly colored and, very gaudy kind of looking things. So that's what they put on Jesus, send him back to Pilate. This is the case for Rome and for Jerusalem. And again, we knew that going in. We knew that Herod had no jurisdiction really here. He couldn't try this case. He really couldn't do anything. He could have tried to get Jesus out of it, but that's it. I mean, he couldn't punish him. He couldn't do anything. But Herod really appreciated Pilate sending Jesus to him, but it didn't turn out the way he had asked or the way he had hoped. All right, so what just happened here? We have a very powerful political leader, well documented in history, who has everything. I mean, if you look at that Herodian palace where he stayed, it would, to this day, would be jaw-dropping on the level of the Taj Mahal, the marble and the things that it said. The walls, you couldn't even see the seams where the floor met the wall because they were that smooth and they were that much without grain. Kind of had two wings coming out there. It was supposed to look like a dove that was rising up. And the building itself, they said, looked like it was in motion the whole time that you were in it. So this guy is, and this is just his side palace. This isn't even where he lives. This is just where he stays when he comes down to Jerusalem. His real home is up in Galilee. Guy has everything he wants. breathtaking palace. He has servants who wait on his servants. He literally gets what he wants, when he wants, how he wants, always. So, when the Messiah stands in front of him, now this guy is a self-proclaimed Jew. He's in Passover, in the city for Passover, to celebrate Passover. He's already sacrificed at the palace or at the temple. And he has the Messiah standing in front of him. He has this once-in-a-lifetime moment, and what does he choose to do? He makes demands from Jesus. He literally says to him, show me your power right here, right now, and then I'll let you know if I'm going to buy into what you're offering. Wait, what is it that you're offering again? I don't even remember that part. Well, whatever it is, I'm not interested unless you give me what I want. Actual footage from Herod. So here's my question for you this morning. Here's what I mean. When you're talking to Jesus, are you talking like Herod is, doing all the talking? Not giving Jesus even a moment to respond? Because he's going to respond to us. Herod didn't even really give him a chance to respond most of that time. Are you making a lot of requests and putting some attachments on it, saying, if you give me what I want, then maybe I'll accept what you're offering? If you give me what I'm looking for in a Messiah, then maybe I'll give back to you what you're looking for from me. But as we go through this series based on Holy Week, we should keep a couple things in the front of our mind. And that's all the things that Jesus went through for you. I mean, as ridiculous as this situation was, this was nothing compared to the beatings he was going to get, the mockings that were accompanied by fists into the face, the shouting was accompanied by spitting on him. We haven't even talked about the nails in this conversation. All for you. So the question is, who do you say he is? And what are you looking for him to do in your life? And do you realize who he is and what he has already done for you? I mean, think about it like this. What do you talk about when you pray to him? If we go back, we talked about this at our high school session. Philippians 4:6 says that we should thank him for everything that he's done and ask him to help us with what we need. Does that sound like what Herod was talking about? Thank him for all he's done and help us with our needs. I'll tell you the truth, this has been an interesting series. It's been a fun series to put together, and it's not over. Well, let's just sum up today by saying, okay, last week we talked about Mary and how she gave her very best to Jesus. Today, Herod is completely the opposite, demanding things from Jesus. So our theme today is that love that Jesus has already given us, the things that he's already done for us, out of that love. So I'm asking you to take some time today, take some time this week to thank him for the love that he's given us and the things that he's done.